In Genesis chapter 3, verses 12 and 13, it tells us this. Then the man replied, "The woman you gave to be with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate." And so the Lord God asked the woman, "What is this you have done?" And the woman said, "It was the serpent. He deceived me, and I ate." We see here Adam and Eve's response to being caught after they ate the fruit that they were not supposed to eat. You know, God had commanded them not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The serpent tempted Eve. Eve gave in and ate. Then she gave to Adam. And here we see what Adam's response was when they were found. God knew what had gone on, but God wanted them each to admit what they had done. And in the process of admitting what he had done, Adam blamed Eve. He said, "The woman that you gave to me." He not only blamed Eve, but he implicated God. When he said it that way, he was implicating God in this sin. He was saying, basically saying, if you hadn't given me this woman, this woman that's basically inferior, or something, she's the one that did it. That's a very, very dangerous place to be, a dangerous thing to do. We see also that Eve didn't take responsibility either, because she blamed the serpent. The things that we see here, though, and that we need to learn, and especially as we look at the punishment, this stuff, they didn't get away with blaming the other person, because the serpent ended up being punished, but not only the serpent, but Eve was punished, Adam was punished, and Adam was punished even more severely than Eve, because he was supposed to be watching out for Eve. He was the head of the household, so to speak. He was supposed to take care of her spiritually and physically, and he didn't do his job. He should have stopped all of this. But we also see here that we need to be careful that we take responsibility for our sin. We can never blame somebody else. There may be extenuating circumstances, and this may happen, that may happen, but it doesn't matter. Ultimately, we have to make the right choice to say, no, I will not do this. We always have that choice, especially as a child of God. We need to be very careful that we make the right choices. And if we make the wrong choice, we need to take responsibility, to confess our sin, because God says that he is faithful and just to forgive our sin and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. It's better to openly and willingly confess your sin than it is to try to get away with it. But we also want to be careful that we don't implicate God in what we're doing. We can never say to God, well, if you wouldn't have left this person come into my life, I would have never done that. If you wouldn't allowed this to happen, I would have never done that. We cannot blame God for any of our sin. Again, we have to take full responsibility. God cannot be involved in sin. God cannot be involved in giving sin or tempting at all. So we have to be very careful about this. But the other thing that I see here is that God didn't rebuke or condemn Adam when he said that. God could have very easily said, first of all, buddy boy, you did this. You are the one that sinned. You could have said no. You should have stopped Eve. But he didn't come at Adam that way. And he could have said, you have no right to implicate me in this at all. This is on you and you alone. But God didn't do that. He just moved on to Eve. Eve passed the blame. He didn't say anything to her either. He just went straight to the serpent. And when he dealt with the serpent, he didn't ask him any questions. He just gave him his punishment because he'd already been condemned for rebelling in heaven and getting thrown out. And so we see that. And we see that, the woman had certain things that, the intensity of labor pains, and that she was going to, there's going to be a problem between her and her husband. But we also seen earlier when God dealt with the serpent that even though Eve's going to have more pain in labor and having children, she's still going to have the blessing of having children. And it's going to be someone that came in, down her bloodline that's going to be Jesus Christ. Because every person, can follow their bloodline back to Adam and Eve. And so there was still blessings. So God still didn't take away the blessing from them. A certain amount of blessing. But then when he got to Adam, God said, because you listened to your wife's voice. You see, he's ultimately holding Adam responsible because Adam should never listen to his wife. He should have known, whenever he arrived on the scene and seen what was going on, he should have put a stop to it. And definitely he should have never ate. So he got a very harsh punishment. He was going to have to work twice as hard, maybe, many more times as hard, because the earth wasn't going to produce like it did before. He was going to have to sweat. He was going to have deal with thorns and thistles. So there was definitely punishment, but God was still providing. Even in all of this, God still provided. God killed the first animal to make clothes for Adam and Eve. So even in the worst sin that you could possibly think of, God's still there for you, especially for us today. If we confess our sin and God brings us back into fellowship with him, he's there for us. So I would encourage you today to be willing to confess your sin, to agree with God, to confess it, let God forgive, accept his forgiveness, and understand that he's cleansed you of all unrighteousness and he's still there for you. You can move on. You don't have to be stuck in your past. You don't have to be mired down by your sin because God forgives and God is still there for you.